Okay, so the big idea of this next lesson is all about solving polynomial equations, and we're going to be solving using what's called factored form, and we're going to use a zero product property. So let's talk about some vocabulary first. So what is factored form? Well, factoring is actually going to be a big thing we're going to start in the next lesson, and factored form is basically when you take a product and you write it as basically a multiplication problem of its factors. So for example, let me just write that down first. So again, factored form is a polynomial written as a product of its factors. And do you guys remember what factors are? Remember, factors are what you multiply together to create a product, to create something, what's two things multiplying equal to. So for example, factored form of something like x to the third plus 4x would be x times x squared plus 4. So when you distribute that, we get the same thing as x to the third plus 4x, and this is just what we call factored form. So we're breaking it back down to what we multiplied to get that product. And factoring is actually going to be a really, really important skill, which again, we're going to start next lesson. Doesn't hurt to say it now, but you're going to need it for Algebra 2. It's a big thing in pre-calc as well, so good thing to be aware of as we get to that next. Okay, so once we have factored form, we can use what we call the zero product property to solve the equation. And the zero product property just basically says if you have a product that is equal to 0, either of the factors has to be 0. So writing that down would say if a product of two real numbers is 0, then at least one of the numbers is 0. So for example, if a times b equals 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0. And that's what that zero product property says, and it makes sense, right? The only way you can get something to multiply and be 0 is if one or both of those numbers are 0. We don't know which in this case because we don't know what a and b are, so we want to make sure we cover all of our bases here. So we want to say all possibilities. Okay? Roots are basically the solutions of a polynomial equation. So it's just another way of saying solution for us. So roots are solutions to polynomial equations. So if you hear me say solution or roots, they're basically the same thing. Okay, and then repeated roots are probably exactly what you're thinking about. Repeated roots are when a polynomial equation has two or more of the same solution. Okay, so again, repeated roots are when two or more solutions to a polynomial equation are the same. All right? So we're going to go ahead and apply the zero product property to solve a few examples, and then we're going to look at some basic factoring today as well. All right, so if you take a look at example A through E, you might see this and be like, whoa, there's a lot going on, but I want you guys to think about that zero product property. So remember, when you look at this product, it multiplies to 0, so that means either one of the factors needs to be 0. And what are the factors here? Well, remember, that's what we're multiplying together. So we're multiplying 3x times x minus 6. So that means each of these parts we're going to check separately. So that means 3x could have been 0, or x minus 6 could have been 0, or they both could have been 0, right? We don't know. So we want to go ahead and solve both of these equations to give all possible solutions. So that means x could be 0 or x could be 6, right? And if you're not sure, you can always go back and double check. So I can plug it back in to check. So if I want to check x equals 0, I'm going to do 3 times 0, and then x 0 minus 6, that should equal 0. 0 times negative 6 does equal 0. And I can check the other one. So I want to check x equals 6. 3 times 6 times 6 minus 6, does that equal 0? Well, 18 times 0 definitely equals 0. So you can see why we have two possible solutions here. So same deal for B, C, D, E, okay? Again, what are we multiplying together? We've got this x plus 5 times x minus 4. So that means we have two different equations we need to create. X plus 5 equals 0, or x minus 4 equals 0. And then simple one-step equation for us right here. So x equals negative 5 or x equals 4. All right. It's also perfectly fine to have something like 4x plus 5 times 4x minus 5 here. Doesn't matter, remember, we're just looking at what we multiply together. It's fine to get fractions, decimals as our answers, but make sure you're setting them up correctly. So 4x plus 5 can equal 0, or 4x minus 5 could be 0. And once again, solve, and this time we have a two-step equation. And we're going to get a fraction as our answer, which is fine. Do not fear fractions. They could be right answers. They are numbers that we use all the time, so we don't want to say that they can't be a right answer. So in this case, x equals negative 5 over 4, or x equals positive 5 over 4. Okay, with D, there's really only one thing happening here, but if you're really confused by this, remember, you can rewrite the square as r plus 6 times r plus 6. And then what you'll notice is, wait, both of these are the exact same thing. So there's really only one equation we need to solve when they're the exact same thing. So r plus 6 had to be 0, which means there's only one possible solution. I'm so used to writing x, I was about to write x. There you go. The one possible solution is r equals negative 6, and that's special here because it's a perfect square. All right? So don't assume it's always just going to be the same answer unless it's a perfect square. Okay? E is just showing you we don't have to be limited to 2. All right, we can have 3 things being multiplied together, and in this case, we have n plus 5, n minus 2, and also n minus 7. So it's perfectly fine to have, 3, 4, 5 different equations. All right, you just still solve them. So here we're going to get n equals negative 5, n equals 2, or n equals 7. Okay, cool. The one thing I forgot to mention, when you have something like D, this is that repeated root. So it's okay to just write it once, but you want to realize that there are, two solutions here, technically, but it's really just one value because it's a repeated root. Okay? So go ahead and try 1 through 6 for me, and we'll come back and we'll check our answers, and hopefully these will go nice and quickly. All right, go ahead and check 1 through 6. Remember, for number 5, you only have to write that answer once. I didn't show my work here, so obviously you want to make sure you're showing your work so I know what you did. And let's go ahead and stop here so this video doesn't go on and on forever, and we'll talk about factoring and solving with that factoring in class. Come back with questions, please, and thanks for listening.